which means that there's been an infusion in the governor's budget of money to school divisions because the standards of quality have changed. And so those standards of quality are things that like determine what is the ratio of school counselors to students, what is the ratio of principals to students, what is the ratio of lots of things and lots of things to students. And then in theory, the state is supposed to fund those standards of quality. They have traditionally not funded the full standards of quality. And so what ends up happening is the state has over time provided us an unfunded mandate. They've said, we want you to meet these benchmarks for staffing, but we're going to give you money, but we're not going to give you enough to do what you need to do. So we've been able to pick up the difference locally. And the way that we staff in the city of Falls Church, as everybody knows, is we staff very richly. We keep our pupil-teacher ratios very low. We keep our ratios to counselors really low. So when the state went back this year, and they do this every 2 years, and re-benchmarked, they changed some of the ratios. So for example, the ratio in school counselors dropped. So they want less students per counselor. And then they added some funding for schools to be able to meet that new ratio. Well, we already meet that ratio. And because we already meet that ratio, it means that we have a little extra money that's coming into the system that we don't have to put into those school counselors that allows us some flexibility to do some other things with. So in the end, what ended up happening was we got an infusion of money to support the new standards of quality, all of which we already meet or exceed, so we can use those funds differently and maintain the ratios that we have. And that's good news. That's good news for us, and it allowed us now to be able to come in at the guidance from the city council. So let me kind of go through this. The idea of a budget always is to try to tell a story. And so I welcome your feedback if it doesn't tell a story or if there's some things in here that just don't make sense. But I wanted to make sure that you all were the first to see it. So we started, and I want to give credit where credit is due. Michelle Kopic and Kristen Michael have worked extensively over the winter break on this presentation, on getting the numbers together. We met as a team a couple of times with the leadership of the division, with all of you, teachers, to get information. But in the end, the people that have done the yeoman's work behind this budget truly are Michelle and Kristen. So I want to thank them for their help. So we started with our mission and our vision. And this isn't anything that you all haven't seen before. But just as a reminder that we are a student-centered, innovative, inclusive community of lifelong learners that aspires to be the premier international baccalaureate school division. We do look at personalizing the environment for every child's unique needs, and that's what has allowed us to maintain those class size ratios to make sure that we meet our mission, and preparing our students to be responsible, caring, internationally minded citizens. We also have the IB Continuum logo there. And then on the left-hand side, the learner profile traits that we pay so close attention to. We've added the additional placemat, or the revised placemat, excuse me. And here again, we're talking about the IB for all, and what does that mean? It doesn't mean that every high school student is an IB diploma candidate, but it does mean that every elementary PYP student accesses IB, every MYP student accesses IB, and every high school student, to the capacity that they have, access the IB program. And I oftentimes will use my son, rightly or wrongly, who goes to an IB high school, and this year he's a junior, and he's not an IB diploma candidate, but he loves film, and so he's taking IB film study, and that's where his niche is. He loves history, so he's taking History of the Americas IB. Although he's not an IB candidate, he is an IB student. And so we are asking students at our high school to find where their strengths are, build into that an opportunity to take some IB courses where they can. But those courses that are not international baccalaureate courses will also be taught with the same approaches to learning and approaches to teaching that all of our IB classes are taught. We are focused on a caring community and culture, and we're focused like a laser on closing gaps for students that are that are struggling to meet standard. And again, all of that sits on top of those learner profile traits as we move ahead. And those are those pieces of work, IB, caring community, and closing the gap, really lay on top of, again, our triennial plan that has priorities. So if people wanted to dig deeper into what are the strategies to support instruction, the strategies to support excellent staff, optimal facilities, fiscal management, and community engagement, anyone could dig more deeply into our triennial plan to get a sense for that. We did include some information in here about our current pass rates in the aggregate on the SOL exams as it compares to the state and also to our history. And as I've said to you all before, and you've heard a number of times, for the first time in 5 years, we're at a 90+ pass rate in the aggregate across all 5 domains that are assessed by the standards of learning. So in the aggregate, we're doing really well. And again, it's one of those things that at the top level, it's very positive, but when you begin to peel it back, there are some students still that are struggling to learn, whether there are ESOL students, our special ed students, or our students in poverty. But again, in the aggregate and in comparison to the state, we do remarkably well. This is a new slide we're adding this year, and this is diplomas and completions for all students in the class of 2019 compared to the state. I think it's interesting because it shows you in dark blue how many of our students on the left-hand side are getting an advanced diploma. And then the light blue is how many of our students are getting a standard diploma. And then in the purple, it's students that are getting GEDs, certificates, or other non-graduates. They're not considered dropouts, but they're finding alternative pathways to completing high school. And so we have a small number of students that are doing some other programming to complete our high school. But when you compare it to the state, 72% of our graduates are getting the advanced diploma versus 51%. 26 are getting standard versus 40%. The state has a 5.6% dropout. We have a 0% dropout for all intents and purposes. And then our number of other credentials and GED certificate programs is smaller than what the state has as well. So in comparison with the rest of the state, we are continue to be positioned very well. So all of that in sort of sum total to say that we are a really good, high-functioning, quality school division. And in the end, it's really based on the people that we have and the work that our leadership and our folks in central office are doing to support schools. We do talk a little bit about student achievement in IB, and here I kind of I'll talk about the PYP, MYP program and the diploma program. Again, everyone takes PYP, everyone takes MYP, and a lot of our students take the diploma program courses. And to sort of ferret that out a little further, on the left-hand side at the bottom, you'll see 86% of our juniors and 87% of our seniors enroll in at least one international baccalaureate course. So going back to find your strength and take a course and challenge yourselves, we're seeing that happen in the high school at a very, very high level. This year, or last year, we had 47 international baccalaureate diplomas awarded. So we had a significant number of our student population do move ahead and get that IB diploma, and that is up from the year before. Some student recognitions, and we'll clean some of these slides up like sent to GM. We've got some folks that are looking these over. But here you'll see some things like we're champions of character. We recognize students for the robotics team or cyber patriots. We also at the elementary level look at Math Olympiad or OM kids or Odyssey of the Mind. We engage in word masters. And so we've got a lot of really high functioning kids that are participating in some really cool national and even international programs. Again, this budget is reflective of and thoughtful of, and I think deferential in many ways to the fact that we are building a huge community investment of the new high school, and we are trying to be as fiscally responsible because of that. I want to pause just for a second on this slide, and I'm going to use my cursor. And if you go onto the website and you look at the building, you will see this. cursor's not showing up. This is the bar that's being built right now. And just by the way, they're at the top. They're at the 5th floor. So you get a chance to see 1/3 roughly of the steel is almost complete for the new high school. I just share that with you guys, just in case you want.
And maybe
6 months, and we are T-minus 360 days to move in. If this were next year, we would have yesterday had our first class in the new high school.
Wow.
Super exciting. Yeah, so let me show you the enrollment projections. I won't bore you with the gory details, but it all comes from Weldon Cooper, which is the Cooper Center out of the University of Virginia. They look at birth data, and they also look at cohort data. The one thing they don't look at that's important for everybody in here to know is they don't look at until it is all completed any local housing or economic factors. So for example, what's not counted into the Weldon Cooper numbers are Founders Row, the development at the high school, what's going to happen over here at Broad and Washington. But as those go up, we anticipate that our enrollment will too. So here's what we see from a historical perspective. It'll be really hard to tell, but this goes back to 2001, 2002. And you can clearly see the trend line of where we're headed as a school division. We did take a little dip here, and we're back on the climb. And I anticipate that we will continue to climb going forward as some of the new housing projects come online, and as some of our older housing inventory begins to turn over and younger families come in. So just to give you a sense, this is broken down by grade. And so it starts at kindergarten is the blue, all the way up to 12th grade is the orange. So you can kind of see where kids fall across the spectrum. And it may be useful as we think forward. But
That
here's,
legend's far too small.
the legend's really small. We'll fix the legend and maybe try to make it a little bigger.
Yeah, kindergarten is small next year.
Yeah. So here's the enrollment projections. And again, this is kind of an eye chart for those of you that are sitting further away. But here's the big story here is that the enrollment is expected to increase by 37 students from September 19th, September of 2020, for a total in FY21 of 2,698 students total. What you'll see down the right-hand axis, which I think is important, is that there is some movement of where kids are. So for example, in kindergarten, we are anticipating 13 less students, but we're looking at 15 more at 1st grade. 3 less at 2nd grade.
Big kindergarten year.
Huh?
There's a lot of kindergartners this year.
There are a lot of kindergartners this year. And by the way, kindergarten is the hardest grade to account for because we have no idea who's coming. You know, we try to beat the bushes, we try to find out from the local providers who's coming, but at the end of the day, we don't know. So we thought actually that we were gonna have less kindergartners last year. We thought we were gonna have about 165, we ended up with 181. So you may remember we ended up putting back a kindergarten teacher in a para out of our staffing reserve. But the big interesting number here is this is like the mole through the snake, if you will. This is that big class at 6th grade is now moving up to 7th grade, and 65 less in 6th grade and 41 more in 7th grade. So just an interesting sort of movement as we go along. And that will represent ultimately in a few years the largest senior class at George Mason High School. But we'll have plenty of room for them, which is good. Our proposed budget expenditures, this is something that you've seen every year. And the big thing I want to point out here is on the right-hand side, more than anything, you'll see salaries and benefits. And if you add those two numbers together, it's about 86%. 86% of our total budget goes into people. So when you hear people say, well, why don't you cut your costs? Why don't you tighten your belt a little bit as a school system? It's really hard to do when 86% of your budget is in salaries and benefits, which service the students that we serve every single day. So we can't just take out a 1st grade teacher and then redistribute those 22 kids across the other 1st grade teachers and maintain our class sizes that we've always had. The other thing that's important in here, and I think it's a good story too, is that our city council and our local government has been very generous with the schools, and 81%, or 82% really, if you round up, of our budget comes from local transfers. And that's important. So the state represents 14.7%. We get a really small amount from the federal government. Only 1.1% comes in Title I, Title II, Title III, IDEA, and the like. And then the fees and other are, we charge tuition and we collect other fees from different places. And then we have a very small beginning balance that we always count on. So this is last year's money that pours forward into the coming year. So as I mentioned, in December, we got 3.1% guidance. Just to put it into numbers, 3.1% guidance represents about $1.35 million. So that essentially is our pot of money that we have coming from the city that ultimately we get to use in our budget, which represents, again, organic growth. We have used over the last year sort of a handshake agreement between the general government and the schools that we would do revenue sharing. In other words, we would share equally the revenue between the city and the schools. However, just in case you're asked, we do get slightly more than 50% because we represent a greater portion of the general population, if you will. So it ends up being closer to 61-49 or 62-38, 61-39. But what's nice about the revenue sharing methodology is that if there are any other revenues that come in after we've built our budget, we've agreed that we would share them 50-50. And sometimes that happens, right? You get to the end of the budget cycle and suddenly revenues are greater than you thought they were gonna be, and $700,000 falls out of the budget. That would mean the schools would get $350,000 and the general government would get $350,000. So the total transfer then, at 3.1%, adding 1.35 million, ends up being $44,596,706, which represents about 81.7% of our budget. So here's the state revenue story. Based on the governor's budget on December 17th, our state revenue is going to account for about 12.7% of our total revenue. You'll see state aid at about 4.8 million and sales tax at 3.1. The second bullet on the first under state aid is the one that's important to note, and that is that's projected to grow by about $712,000. And under sales tax, that first bullet is we're going to grow by about $253,000. Those are rather significant increases based on the re-benchmarking that was done at the state level. So those two numbers combined, plus the 44.8 million that the city has said that they would move to us based on the 3.1 transfer, gives us a little bit of room to do some things. So here you'll see, again, sort of a re-narrative of 96.3% of our budget comes from state and local, and there how the federal revenue breaks down, and then our beginning balance breaks down. So here are our priorities. As I mentioned well, let me back up. We had an opportunity to meet, you all had an opportunity to meet with all of your department leads. We've had a chance to talk about what it is that your hopes and desires are for budget. We talked with all of the schools. The school leaders held meetings with their staff, and a massive list was generated of things that we would like to have, wants and needs. And when we totaled that list, not including compensation increases, the list was about $2.1 million. So $2.1 million is not possible. And it didn't include compensation. And if compensation is important, which I think it is actually everyone's #1 priority, we really felt like we needed to take care of compensation early to continue growing our system and growing our salary scales. So we are committed to putting into the budget, into the proposed budget, a step increase for all eligible employees. And we see that as the ongoing commitment to our school division to help teachers and staff progress along the continuum of growth. And that's about, on average, a 2.7% increase in salary. and then a 1% cost of living adjustment. And that 1% cost of living adjustment costs us about $409,000. And that does a couple of things. One is it increases the amount of compensation that each employee will get to about a 3.7% average. But it also helps our salary scale move up. If we only did a step, our salary scale would stay exactly the same. And it's important to grow our salary scale because we want to remain competitive regionally with other school divisions. So our beginning teacher salary actually will go up when we do a cost of living adjustment. It wouldn't go up if we only did a step. So those two combined again are about 1.3, almost $1.4 million. So remember how much we have to start with. We have a couple of things that are priorities because they have to be priorities and we don't have any way around them. So our healthcare insurance rates are going to go up by about $321,000 or $322,000. That's a 10% increase, and that is both the employer and the employee portion. So there will be a slight increase in employee contribution, but the employer contribution is going to go up as well. The Virginia retirement system is making some adjustments, and this will not impact employees, it only impacts the employer. And the reason that they made the adjustments is because they are worried that the economy may stabilize. It's been growing pretty dramatically, but if it stabilizes, they don't see the rates of return being what they thought they were going to be. So we need to contribute next year $271,000 more than we did this year. And then life insurance rates increased on the margin, but that'll cost us an additional almost $2,000. So those are mandatory, those are super priority. And then we got to other priorities that would become investments in our goals and in our future system. We have not had an opportunity to do this really in the 2 years that I've been here so far. And it's sort of exciting. In some ways we did, but really in a unique way this year. We have an opportunity to kind of grow the system. So when we went through as a leadership team and looked at those $2 million in requests that were there, we started to cull them out and look at them and look at that middle column, primary goal alignment. And we tried to align everything back to our 3 top goals of IB, closing the gap, caring community, and culture. And then also tried to look at how did they contribute to secondary, elementary, preschool, and system-wide. And so the things that were identified to move forward in the superintendent's budget are an additional IB MYP coordinator at the secondary level. So as you know, currently Alicia Miller is the IB MYP coordinator who is running between George Mason High School and Mary Ellen Henderson. She has responsibility for 5 grade levels of students. So MYP is 6th grade to 10th grade. The amount of work that needs to go on, particularly at the high school, is becoming overwhelming, I think, to the work that Alicia is trying to accomplish. So we anticipate adding an additional MYP coordinator. And the way that could shake out would be part-time in the schools and part-time here in central office to help support curriculum and instruction. So we would see maybe a half-time person at Mary Ellen Henderson, a full-time person at the high school, and then a half-time here at central office. The reason it would be half-time at Henderson is because Henderson has some pretty good capacity to do a lot of the work associated with MYP right now. But the high school needs some extra support. Additionally, we're looking at an additional position for English Language Arts K-12 coordinator, and this would be likely an elementary location position, but that person would be charged with closing the gaps in English Language Arts as the K-12 system. So they would provide professional development, they would essentially mirror the brilliant work that Jen Fessenden has done in the area of mathematics, but within the area of language arts. So it would be a partner in crime with Jen to be able to go out and sort of work their magic in the 2 traditional core curriculum. We right now have 2 part-time social workers, and we would like to bring those 2 social workers up to full-time. or to hire another full-time person, depending on how it shakes out. But we did put in the budget, an additional social worker, and that is tied to caring community and culture. We do know that we have some rather significant needs socially and emotionally in our system and with our families, and adding that social worker would help. We do need to make some contract length adjustments to some people in the system. So for example, we are looking at changing the contract length for Marie Baruti so that she's here during the summer and can do ESY. We would be looking at Adam White over at the middle school, since he's running the Lighthouse program, and a couple other positions to change some contract lengths. And then some additional support for JTP's clinic and office. For those of you that know Kayleen is there, and Kayleen doesn't stay the whole day, and puts Marie in a position where Marie is the clinic aide and also is answering the phones and can't do the supervision of teaching and learning that we hope could happen at JTP. So adding some support there would help us get to that caring community and culture, and also help us, I think, close some gaps for some students. And then lastly is some custodial support. We're adding 100,000 square feet at the high school, and that 100,000 square feet needs to be covered. If you do the formula, we really need 5 additional custodians to cover that additional 100,000 square feet. Here in the budget, we're not supporting all 5. We are looking at an additional 3 positions. So we're more than halfway there. And at the end of the year, or at the end of the budget cycle, if some more money fell out, we might consider adding some more custodial positions there. So those are positions that really would, in many ways, we think, help us build for the future, help our system become better in IB, closing gaps in caring community, and total investments represent about $540,000, $541,000. Which is obviously short of the $2 million requests that we had, but we couldn't do it all, so we had to make some decisions. So here are some areas that we need to look at some reductions to really sort of make it all work, because with those growth positions, with the salary and benefits, and with the mandatories, we actually are exceeding the amount we have. But we are able to pick up an additional $59,000 in salary lapse. That's money for positions that weren't filled, that are in the system. We have some other employee benefits where we have some obligations that aren't as great as we thought they were gonna be. So for example, we're gonna save $27,000 in the retiree health care. We're gonna save $44,000 in our transitional retirement, and we'll see a reduction in projections for FICA as well going forward. Requests that were partially funded or will be funded with one-time money, these are also expansions, but they will not be recurring, is that we would do some additional custodial support, sort of in an hourly function.
No, that's
Materials, custodial support through materials at George Mason. We have put in a grant with Dominion Power and Energy for electric buses. If we get the 4 electric buses that we've requested, we would use about $500,000 of one-time money to pay for those electric buses to replace the old diesels. We are looking at doing a facilities improvement at Henderson to create a secured vestibule for safety and security, and then there would be some additional instructional supports at JTP, supplies specifically. So here's what was not funded. And we can continue to have conversations internally about this, because again, if at the end of the budget cycle, money does end up falling out, we would go directly back to this list to say, all right, what do we want to add back into the budget? Just by the way, we had the same list last year, and this year we're able to take everything off the list from last year, which is really, I think, an important component to this year's budget, and I think somewhat meaningful. It's not to suggest we can take everything off the budget from this year next year, but it certainly gives us a starting point for what do we see as the most valuable. So anyway, these are the things, and there's about $804,000 in additional things that we were not able to fund in the proposed budget. So we'll come back to that. So here's the budget summary. Again, FY '21, revenue is $54,594,000. And here is our budget on the right-hand side in expenditures. And last year it was $1 off, and this year we're right on the money. So we have balanced the budget within guidance, doing compensation and expanding our programs and investing in our school division. So here are some things that are coming up. I will do the presentation to the school board on January 14th. There'll be our first budget work session on the 21st. On February 3rd, we have a CIP presentation to the Planning Commission, and then public hearings, and you can kind of work down from there. But ultimately, the City Council will adopt the budget ordinance, which includes the school transfer, on April 27th. So that's the date that we can kind of look forward to determining whether or not we can do our full budget or not our full budget. And then on May 5th, the school board will come back, do any reconciliation that needs to be done. So for example, if there's a little more revenue, the City Council would then adopt the budget with the additional revenue that came into the budget. So I am optimistic about our budget this year. I feel like we are positioned really well for our work in the future. I think it takes care of our employees. Again, it helps us grow. And in the end, for the second year in a row, we're coming in at the guidance that the City Council has given us. So when we think about some of those traditional dances and fights perhaps between councils and school board, I don't anticipate one of those again this year. We didn't have one last year, and I hope we don't this year as well. So anyway, that's it. That's my story. I'm sticking to it, and I would welcome your feedback, your thoughts, your gut reactions, and I appreciate your honesty too.